Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Forrest and Company webinar, How Did That Happen? The 6 Steps to Figuring Out What Went Wrong. My name is Michael Clark, Director of Business Development here at Forrest and Company, and I will be your moderator today. With me is Tony Welsh, Forrest EVP, Design and Long-Suffering Presenter.
Good afternoon.
Firstly, for everyone, here's some housekeeping. This webinar will be 45 minutes long, including a few minutes for Q&A at the end. I have muted everyone's mic so that we're not talking over top of each other. Send me your questions, though, via the question box in your GoToWebinar interface. I'll pass them on to Tony during the Q&A. Finally, to all registered attendees, I will forward to you a copy of Tony's presentation and a link to the recording of this webinar on the Forest Fire YouTube channel. So with that concluded, Tony, with pleasure, I pass the mic to you.
Well, thanks very much, and thank you all for attending today. I want to start off with just talking about the topic that we have. Of course, I can't advance the slides. Just give me one sec. There we go. So we'd call this the 6 steps for figuring out what went wrong, just like that just did. What this should have been called actually is the 6 steps for figuring out what happened, because this isn't always a process that can be used for when something's gone wrong. It can also be one that can be used to identify if you get any kind of result that you're not expecting, whether it's good or bad, you're better than you felt you were going to be or less. This is a process for defining what that is. And of course, both are important. Both are, one of them is for continuous improvement and also ensuring that you're not going to make the same mistakes over and over again, or you're getting a predictable result. But if you get an excessive result, a very good result that you weren't expecting, the ability to identify exactly what that is and be able to replicate it is a real business advantage.
So it's sort of like finding of the unexpected. If the unexpected happens, either positive or negative, that's what's worth going after.
Yeah, indeed. It means probably that you might have missed something in your original planning for whatever the activity was, or something in the external environment or the internal environment has changed. And again, to be able to identify that is a key issue for businesses that want to get ahead and stay ahead. And things go wrong. They've gone wrong, I'm sure, with you on a weekly, monthly, annual basis. There are big things that go wrong, and there are small things that go wrong. And what we're really talking about here are things that you need to apply a sequence of thinking in order to figure out exactly what it is that went wrong. So you wouldn't necessarily do this for a small thing, but there are elements that you might be able to learn and pull in. But these are generally for larger things like projects, the launch of software, those kinds of things. Just some statistics and some idea about usage. The Canadian military, which I was a member of for quite a while, spend between 20 and 40% of the allocated time for a specific activity doing what they refer to as after-action reviews. So they spend almost half their time going over and trying to analyze what they did rather than actually doing the activity itself, so that they can learn from that and enhance their performance next time around. The Project Management Institute has suggested in some of their training programs, this is the PMI, the sort of cornerstone organization for setting the standard for project management, suggests that 40% of the time on a project should be spent in planning, 40% should be spent actually doing the activity, and at least 20% should be spent not necessarily at the end, but throughout the whole project process to identifying exactly what is going off track if it is, and seeing if they can fix it in time, or at the end, learning what they can learn in order to enhance their project management for the next time around. And many of the systems that we're all aware of, either rising or falling in popularity, total quality management, Lean, Six Sigma, Agile, and any project management system, all of them rely on an element of fixing problems on the fly and getting better at the whole process. Now, this webinar represents the thinking process that is common and underneath all of these various types of manufacturing processes or things. So this is about the thinking that should drive it, and not necessarily a step-by-step process that will get you from one end to the other. So this, the skills we're going to introduce you to here are universal in their application. One of the things to keep in mind here is that in order to think effectively through an issue, you have to be rather deliberate about the way you think. And I just want to put this up quickly. It might seem self-evident to some, but there are distinctive phases in your thinking, and unfortunately many people either leap directly to the end to execute, or they meander through and don't apply any rigor to the thinking that they are using in order to come up with a good solution. So as you can see on the bottom here, find cause, that's what we're going to be talking about today. What went wrong or what went right is a distinct activity. Once you've figured that out, the next thing you do is you need to come to a decision. What will you do about this fault or this enhancement that you've identified? Once you've decided on it, the next step should be to develop a plan that you will follow and then execute that plan in order to either correct the issue or to build that enhancement into your ongoing process.
So it's like instead of approaching an issue in a blizzard of moving forwards and backwards, that you're just being very conscious and controlling on how you do each step, making yourself more efficient and effective at each one.
Very, very well said. And in a lot of meetings that we have, we tend to stop halfway through and say, so what are we actually trying to, what are we trying to fix here? And just thinking about these four segments as being separate segments rather than being just a blur as you run through might help you be a little bit more pedantic and a little bit more specific. And specific, of course, is what the finding cause map is all about. Now this, the presentation that I'm going to give you, if you were here for the last one, we're going to go through much the same background. This finding cause is when anything performs better or worse than standard, the standard that you expect or have set, and you want to know why, specifically diagnose all the factors needed in order to discern the most likely cause. And then again, once you've decided, you've identified the cause, you can make a decision on what you're going to do about it. Now this piece is, is developed very much on the work of Jerry Rhodes, Dr. Jerry Rhodes, in his search for understanding and being able to describe and consult around effective intelligence. Again, this is a terminology or a technology that we use at Forrest and Company for just about everything. And the thing I, again, love about this is that it provides a language for something that we didn't have a language for before, which is specifically the type of thinking that you need to apply in order to be effective at certain times in certain operations.
In some ways, the find cause map, as Jerry calls it, originated with Jerry's work with the Phillips Corporation in the 70s and 80s, and then continued the research thereof.
Some of it did, yeah. Effective intelligence certainly was uncovered by Jerry and his team in the 70s, and the research around effective intelligence continues to this day, where we're consulting and always building the practice around effective intelligence. So with all that said, I just want to give a quick overview of some thinking and by way of colors, because we will be, this will help you to figure your way through the map a little bit more easily as we go through it. So there are three general types of thinking that have been discerned by effective intelligence. One of them is green thinking, as we refer to green thinking, is to realize new opportunities. As you receive information, if you're using green thinking, you're able to realize something that could be, whether it's in the future or right now. The red thinking is about being in the moment, very much about describing what is real, what is truly here. So this is about facts and figures and detail. And blue thinking is about discerning what is judging what is right or wrong, good or bad. And we all use all three of these different types of thinking, although there are one or more of these that you might naturally lean on more than others. So by introducing you to these different colors and these different types of thinking, what we're suggesting to you is that you can actually drive your thinking. If you rely on the same kind of thinking all the time in certain situations, you will always come up with the same result. And is that result good enough? So let's just take that a little bit further. There is a further definition or a division of this type of thinking where you have logical thinking, which is what we refer to as hard, blue, red, and green. And we have emotional thinking, which is soft, blue, red, and green. This is to say that the logic, it's very easy to come up with a logical argument, but emotional thinking, coming from your personal values, a draw to the future, to something wonderful that could be in the future, drives your actions just as readily as the logical side does. And then finally, all of this really is about getting something done. On the right-hand side, the colors that you see, this is what happens inside of your head. These are the types of thinking that you're applying to the stimulus that you're receiving. But the idea is to organize them and to drive your thinking in such a way that you can get something done in the external world. And this, of course, is what everyone else is going to see and judge you by. Right. So the colors in your mind are very much about your intention. And the do on the external is about the perception of others of the activities you're making. And finally, this slide just represents that there very much is the thinking in green is very divergent. It's open to new ideas. It's generating new ideas. Whereas as you move through the red, you're gathering data about some of those ideas. And if you're in blue, you're making decisions. You're coming down to one point of action that you will actually move on.
Convergent thinking versus divergent thinking.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was struggling for that. Well done. Just a quick bit more on the colors. Green, these are the elements of green thinking. So generating many ideas and preferring to generate many ideas. Finding creative ways around problems. Fixing things even if they aren't broken. That might resonate with some. Creating what-if scenarios. What if we were our competitors? How would we look at a problem that we're looking at right now? And also the use of intuition. I've never experienced something like this before, but my gut is telling me. These are very much green thinking, the attributes of someone that's using green thinking at a particular moment, or if they have an overall preference for green. For red thinking, it's about being very specific and detailed. It's also about gathering and organizing data so that it can be found, but also organizing it so that you can realize what data you might be missing and find the holes and then go out and plug them. The softer side, the softer side of the red thinking is about being completely aware of your surroundings. So listening and watching for body language. This is very much about clear communication. It's also about setting level. It's about figuring out who's the right audience for the thing I want to talk about? Or where should I start solving this problem? Is it too big or is it too small or is it just right? And then finally, the blue thinking, which is the one that gets us closer to actually getting things done. It's about making judgments. It's about comparing things side by side. It's about needing to be convinced of something. And also on the softer side of blue thinking, it's about the assertion of personal values, or it could be corporate values or team values, and also about the commitment to coming to closure and getting things done. So that's just a quick overview through the three different types of thinking and the hard and the soft, and hopefully this will help you as we go through and discuss the map that we're about to go through.
Yeah, and Tony, we've got two polls here back to back that I'd like to throw up.
Great.
Not put up. One of them that says just general, and I'm going to put it up right now. Which type of thinking do you tend to avoid? Now, it's as Tony mentioned, so please everybody pile in there. As Tony mentioned, we often have a preference. As a matter of fact, almost always we have a preference for one type of thinking or another, which can result in a poor ability or a tendency to act in the right way. Because we're stuck in a certain type of thinking. But it's pouring in here. What have we got? Cool. We've got very interesting, Tony. And contrary to what our experience is, we've got about 40% now we got 50% in red 31% in green, and 20% in blue. So that sees that there's 50% of this audience avoids red thinking, which is unusual because as Canadians, statistically, red thinking tends to be more dominant. So we've got a very particular audience today, which is great.
Indeed, and perhaps it's the way I've described it. But and we have another poll, do we, Michael?
Yeah, we do. So I'm going to close that poll. Now this one is a little bit more specific to this one. Is which type of thinking do you think is the most important for finding the cause of something? So now that you know the 3 different types of thinking, think to yourself, which is the dominant color here? If I was trying to figure out what went wrong. And we've got some votes coming in, about 20% voting, and it's overwhelmingly red. So we've got about 80% in red, 20% in green, and 10% in blue.
Well spotted. Okay, so it's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah.
50% want to avoid the red, but many realize that it is the key to this. Well, that's great. So let's move ahead. And what I'd like to do now is just give you a quick overview of the what we refer to as the find cause map. Now, we are going to be handling this in somewhat of a linear fashion, taking you through step by step. But one of the things that is true about the human mind, so this is the linear fashion, but true about the human mind is, if you think about it, it's very difficult to simply stay in one mind frame and not think about the rest of them. So there is a natural inclination for people to hop around the various parts of the map. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you realize that you really need to go and honor each one of these steps in order to get the full value and benefit of the thinking that you are bringing to this cause that you're attempting to find.
There's intentionality on your thinking, right? If you are going to be in red, bearing in mind that you might jump off to another one. So it's sort of taking control of your mind, ending the blizzard, focusing on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back and saying, have we stayed in red long enough? How much more information do we need, for example, in order to move to the next step? But again, there's going to be a natural tendency. People don't think very much in linear fashion. They hop from side to side, and that's fine as long as you realize that you are shortchanging a critical element of finding cause. So let's take a look at, I'm going to give you a quick overview, first of all, of the find cause map, and then we're going to go into the details of it. The first step, and again, these can be bounced around from side to side. The first one is to realize or to listen and realize that perhaps something's going off course. You notice you're not getting perhaps the result that you wish to get, or the process or the tool was designed to give you, whatever it happens to be. And this is just about being aware. There can be hard red statistics and numbers in here, but this is something going off course. Now, in a much larger project, there are going to be mechanisms and metrics built in, so you should know there should be trigger points to say, hey, we're either not on time or we're not getting the effect we need. But if this is suggesting it can be that, or it can be just a bit more organic, where you wake up one morning and you say, it just doesn't feel like it's going the way it should.
Yeah, to use Jerry's language, you have the impression that something's going off the rails.
That's right. And if you do, then the next step certainly is to specify the facts. This is a step where you go through a series of questions, and we'll spend quite a bit of time on this one because to me this is one of the most important elements. This is the crux of being successful at finding cause. So you specify all the facts. You think about whether it's internal or external effect, and I'm going to get into much more detail on this later on. Once you've specified the facts, the next step you would go to is you try and find distinctions. You try and group the facts into distinct possible causes overall. Like, every time I do this on Friday, this happens. That's a fact. Well, is it about the day then? Let's start to find some of the distinctions. So you're able to compare the data and see if you can start to group them into what possibly could be going off rail at this particular time.
And notice that the specific color there is the darker. It's the darker, what we call the hard blue, where it's logical. You're not letting your emotions participate in this. This is a logical compare of things.
Right, and you're not making any decisions at this point. You're simply trying to find patterns in the data that you've collected. The next step would be to go further into the detail and the data, and based on the patterns that you have found, you're going to try and trace the relevant changes. You're going to find the facts or even generate more facts that might assist you in figuring out which one of those trends that you've discerned might well be something to investigate further. The next step can be, and again, with respect, you're going to be hopping all around here. You want to think up some of the causes. If you can imagine, what are some of the possible causes that might be attributed to the distinctions that you came up with earlier on?
Tony, one of the things I want to point out is that when people are looking to find the cause, that typically they go straight there. They don't pause to collect the context in which the error or the difference actually happened. They go straight to trying to think up causes, whereas all this work up front narrows that focus and gives you much more energy towards solving it.
Yeah, and it might not be energy in some cases. If your preference isn't with red, the red's going to feel a little bit heavy.
Ooh, okay, true.
But the red needs to be done nonetheless. So you're absolutely right. This is where I might have an inkling in going off course, and I go straight to thinking up causes, and then I'm really shocked and surprised that the fix that I put in place doesn't work.
Exactly.
So right on. And then finally, you want to test the causes. So you want to take all of the information and some of the patterns that you've found, and you've thought up some possible causes. You want to take them back and test them and see if you can determine what the most likely cause is of the issue that you're facing. So one of the things that that's just a quick overview. One of the things...
Tony, I just forgot. So let's take this back to our question. Which is the most important thinking style for finding the cause?
Well, I would suggest that the green is the most fun, for some of us anyway. I'd say that it's the specifying the facts,
right.
Getting that ground-based level of really what's going on here. And I bet you many of you have gone through a loop a little bit like this without realizing you did. If you have kids, one of your kids runs into your room and says, "My computer doesn't work," or it's making a funny noise. And what you generally say is, so something's going off course, generally the answer might be something along, okay, so let's just start over again. Did you plug it in?
Right.
So you start to gather the specific facts and then come up with, is it a server problem? Is the internet out in the building? I'm going to look out the window to see if the power's off on the street. And you can see yourself actually going through some of these on a simpler version. But nonetheless, this is if you're handling a bigger one that you don't know how to tackle. This is designed to be a step-by-step approach to walk you through it.
Okay.
So I'm going to attempt here to come up with a very simple example as I go through each one of these steps. The example that I've chosen is Canada is in the middle of a bit of a dogfight of an election. This isn't meant to represent any of the political parties running either in Canada or anywhere else in the world, but I'm going to assume that I am the campaign manager for a specific candidate, and as I go through, and who's not doing quite as well perhaps as they could be doing. So I'm going to explain the step, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about if I was a campaign manager and I was following this process, what would I do? So let's go now into the detail. Going off course, these are some of the questions that you might ask yourself to figure out whether or not you're going off course. What is being observed? Can I identify what should be happening, and then it's realize that there's a gap between what is happening and what should be happening. There is some hard red detail in this, but this is primarily about just thinking, does it feel like it's doing what it needs to do? Mm-hmm. Do I need to launch this process, or am I seeing enough evidence that it's not doing what it should be doing, and how would I know? So in this case, what I would suggest from the campaign manager is I would start to see maybe there's a slip in the last couple of polls around the candidate. I would notice that the volunteers that are showing up in our office, there's less volunteers showing up, and when they do, they're not smiling. They're not as engaged as they were before. I might notice that when our flyers go out, we're getting a lot less response. Just things like that. Not necessarily the details and the facts, but just saying, my spider sense, if you will, is telling me that something might be going off track.
Yeah, and I love the last point there, Tony, as well, is setting the level on the problem. Like, do I sense that this is a huge problem with some fundamental underlying cause, or do I sense that it's more of a surface thing? Just getting that feeling going, that of observing what's going on.
Yeah, and I'd suggest in most political campaigns, there's a point at which either a candidate or a party will go through this loop, they'll start to feel that something is going on, and they'll either decide to do nothing about it, which is up to them, or a number of campaigns I've seen where the party stops and they go through an iteration much like this, and they come out the other end with a completely different message, right, because the message in the campaign has changed. Happened very recently in our Canadian federal election, where one party took a bit of a right turn. Anyway, not going to get partisan or into that at all. The next step, specify the facts. This is about being exquisitely specific about exactly what are you seeing. So exactly what effects are being observed? Looking at the effects of the objective itself and also effects observed in the surrounding context. So we're looking at the thing, we're also looking at the system thing. You know, is there a knock-on effect up and down? And can we identify exactly what those things are? or not what they are necessarily at this point, but collecting the data. So we know what we should be expecting and we know what we are or are not getting. And then comparing and contrasting the observed to the expected. So I want to spend a little bit more time on this. There's a couple of ways of cutting this. So one of them would be when you're specifying all the facts, one of the things you're going to ask yourself is, what is the thing that I'm seeing? Is it making a noise when it works or not? And the other question that you might ask is, what are the things that are not affected that might as well have been affected?
So I can sort of sense that you're getting a distinction, you're building a distinction there.
That's right.
Or you're heading towards it.
And something that I love about this process, it's not just the things that are affected and the things that are not affected, but it's also the things that are just not affected. So what we're trying to do here is draw a very fine, razor-sharp boundary around what the actual problem is. So what if something is almost not doing what I want it to do, but still doing what I want it to do, is some excellent information for being very precise in the information that you're gathering so that you can discern appropriate patterns later on. By collecting the wrong garbage in, garbage out, the
right,
wrong data in is going to lead you to the wrong development of a solution and the wrong test. Something might pass the test even if it's not appropriate. So that's one way of looking at it. What is affected, and you learn just as much about the issue as by discerning what is not being affected. Another way of looking at this is by looking what is happening inside, so within our control, within our organization, and then what's happening outside the organization. So that's inside and outside. Has the environment changed? We're still doing the same thing that we were doing, but the marketplace has shifted.
Right.
Or is it an internal thing, something that we have developed and we're pushing towards is not working the way it needs to work?
Yeah, so suddenly you discover that there's a bug in the information systems, as versus externally they've suspended the use of the program that you're using, something along those lines.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So these are a couple of very simple questions that juxtapose these two types of things. So looking inside, under the what is affected column here. So what is affected? What is it? What is I'm seeing? When does it happen? How many of them? How many times does it happen? How many things are affected? And then what is affected on the outside is how is it affecting the outside world? Is there anything that's happening out there that is affecting us inside? What exactly is this system? Sort of what exactly in the system is it? Where exactly is it? So is it upstream? Is it in the middle? Is it the crux? Is it downstream? Is it, again, this can apply to so many things that sometimes it's difficult to come up with examples. When in the project or time does it occur? Does it only happen when we are meeting, or does it happen directly after a meeting? when it's been running for, the machine's been running for an hour, is that when it starts? Those kinds of things. And then how much of it is affected? Is the whole thing affected or just one little piece of it?
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully you can see the application here for manufacturing, for project management, for software development, or for just about anything, project marketing launch even.
Or the rollout of an HR policy.
Yeah, indeed. When you take a look at what is not affected or what is just not affected, so what is not or just not? Very simple question. Where else is close? So where else is, would I expect to see something, but I'm not seeing it? If this part is broken, I would expect this part to be broken, but it's not.
Right.
If this part is working outside of parameters, I would expect this one to be outside. It's just within parameters still. So what does that information tell you? On the external, what fault can we anticipate? So what else should be going wrong that's not going wrong right now? Where else should I look? And this might be another source of information when I ask that question. Well, if this part's broken, I hadn't thought about the next 5 pieces, but maybe I'll look 6 down and see if there's a knock-on effect down there. When do we not observe this? When is it not happening? Or when is it just not happening? It allows us, again, from a time point of view, to specify exactly when this thing is occurring or not. And then how much is it just not being affected? Now, these sound like perhaps like you're the fairies dancing on the head of a pin, but what they allow you to do is to be crystal clear on exactly what the problems could be.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking somebody who's not, let's say, inclined to red thinking and specify as a red act. This is a wonderful exercise to really wrap your head around it. I mean, I think what you're trying to say is that there are lots of different angles on what might just look like a black and white thing, but in fact, you can dig, and the deeper you dig, the more specificity you'll get.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it actually works out very well for you if you are, let's say, have a preference for green thinking. You're going to wander off into la-la land on a fairly regular basis, like I do, because I have a preference there, and try and imagine fixes without actually knowing what the problem is. I think one of the great things about effective intelligence in general is it makes the invisible visible. So by me asking my team these questions, I can pry from them things that they assume everyone knows, but in fact we don't. So if they're an expert in an area and you ask them, okay, got it, but specifically what's supposed to happen, and they go through the process, you're going to find the rest of the team goes, oh, I didn't know that. That's right. Cool. And now they've got common data, so the whole team can get more effectively engaged in discerning what the possible issues are and what the fixes are going to be at the end. So in the case of the candidate, some of the things that they specified, I'm not going to go through all of these. They noticed that in the last 3 polls, specifically, the candidates dropped 2 to 4%. That might not be alarming, but it could be. Specifically, 60% of their volunteers don't show up, and for some reason, they only don't show up on Fridays. And the one thing that happens on the east side of this riding, the candidates visit, and whenever the candidate visits, their signs tend to get pulled down. Outside, they have 5 less requests for interviews from various radio stations than they did the last time they were up. There's still 3 weeks to go in the process, and other candidate activities seem to be exactly the same as they were. There's nothing they're doing differently that is affecting us. So this might allow me to, when I'm going through and looking at the possible distinctions, I can say, yeah, this is an internal thing rather than being external. The number of web hits are up. I mean, there's so much data that you could have collected here, but you're kind of discerning that the candidate himself is not hitting where he needs to hit. So let's get on to the next one, finding distinctions. This is based and should be based on the data that you've just collected. What are the qualities that distinguish things affecting from those things not affecting? So you're trying to figure out where are the boundaries, and can I notice any trends by comparing the data together? This isn't necessarily making a decision. It's simply looking at it from a very logical point of view, a hard blue logical lens, and saying if these data are true, then what are the possible groupings that might make some sense? Can I put a name to the pattern is a great way of talking about this. Now that you've done that, you're able to, remember in that first slide when we, on effective intelligence, when we said that green is divergent and blue is convergent, they actually converge through the red. So what we're doing here is we're taking all that data that we gathered during the specify section. We now have some groupings that we'd like to investigate more. This is now challenging and making sure we've got the right information, that we have the specific information that might either support or disprove some of the distinctions that we've found to be evident earlier. So challenge some of the assumptions that the distinctions are either directly impacting or maybe they're not. Maybe it's just a flyer that there's something that happened, but you can't actually attribute it to the cause that you're trying to find.
Okay.
So in back to our candidate, in the case of tracing the relevance, one of the things that there we go, finding the distinctions, what we found is primarily the problems that they're facing are geographic boundaries based on the information that we gathered. And then when we went to trace some of the elements, what we found was that the language in that particular area, the eastern side of the group, the language was not English. It was primarily Farsi.
Okay.
So this could be some more, it's just straight information at this point, but what it allows us to do is to move on to the next step, thinking up causes. You'll note that this is soft green, because what you're saying is you don't know what the next step is necessarily. You're saying, what if? What does your gut tell you? Based on the distinctions that we've made and the relevant detail that we've gathered to reinforce those distinctions, what could some of the possible causes be? And in this case, they're kind of evident. Perhaps the eastern portion, with the candidate, the eastern portion of that riding would require a bit more of an outreach to a different ethnic organization that they have right now. So some of the causes could be, I am not a Farsi speaker. I don't speak any Farsi at all. And when I show up, it seems to decrease my popularity in the area. So those could be some of the causes. We're not going for decisions yet. We're just trying to find the cause. And then finally, the final step is testing the causes. Is this logical? Does this make sense? When you put it together when you take all the data that we've collected and the possible distinctions that we've found, we've bubbled up a couple of possible ideas. Which one of these is probably the most likely? Which is the one that's going to get us the furthest? Which is the one that best actually fixes the observation we had at the very beginning that things are off course somehow? So I'm happy to say that they decided the candidate needed to recruit a couple more volunteers of Farsi background, and he needed to learn about 15 words of greeting in Farsi.
Of course.
And of course, by doing that, he happily won the election. Ta-da! So that's the find cause map. A couple of things that I would like to zoom in on here. One of them is it's all about the specify, whether you do it at the beginning, in the middle, or the end. At the beginning is better because it's a really clean source of detail and data. But that's one of the things that gets missed. The second one is the push towards the green. Let's just come up with the cause, and let's forget about the fact that there's a whole bunch of things that don't relate to that. Don't go necessarily where the energy goes, but make sure that you hit each one of these all the way through, and also make sure that your test is logical. Does it pass the sniff test? Or as we say in Canada, does it pass the Globe and Mail test?
That's interesting.
Do we have a poll here,
Bit of a bias. Yeah, and we do actually have a poll, everybody. So we're just asking you, finally, with each of these steps, which of these steps do you have the greatest challenge? So now that we've sort of broken apart finding cause into its constituent parts, and we've got just 5 here, tell me which one's going to have the most, you're going to have the most difficulty with. And the numbers are coming in. It's very interesting. It's split. Nope, no, it's jumping around. Well, first of all, we're getting it certainly right across the board. Everybody is going to have at least one of those is going to be an issue. I think with 65% of the vote, the trend, though, is going to be the difficulty in tracing relevant changes and in specifying all the facts. That's what I'm getting here.
Cool. Okay. Well, we do have some information we're sending out after this.
Yep.
So a small tool we have that will be available that breaks down all the possible questions you could ever possibly ask in any possible circumstance.
Okay, for sure. Now, speaking of which, I do want to be cognizant of everyone's time, so we've only got a few more minutes in, so certainly if you wanted to send me any questions, I've got some here. I'm trying to parse them just for Tony's readability. And so, for example, Tony, when we're talking about specifying all the facts, can you go into a little... Yeah, I think what we're getting is the impression the audience here is that they're having some difficulty getting their heads around the just and is not and just not. Like, what's the distinction between is and almost is?
Okay. Well, I think the beauty of asking that question is not just going black and white. It's either doing it or it isn't doing it. It's those things that are marginally affected but are still doing what they need to do. And actually the flip side is, what is something that's almost right but not quite right?
Oh, I see. So they can work on both sides.
Yeah,
almost right, almost wrong.
Yeah, so if you imagine a continuum, on the far left is it's right, it's doing what it needs to do. On the far right, it's wrong, it's not doing what it needs to do. And in the middle, it's almost doing what it needs to do, but it's not. And the other one is it's almost not doing it, but it's still doing it.
Okay, got it. Okay. One more here. We've got, can you specify in a bit more detail, more detail, about distinctions? Let's talk a bit more about distinctions.
Certainly, the distinctions are not necessarily, it's to be avoided to come up with conclusions at that point. All you're looking for is, where are the themes? Where are the common themes that run through? So when you're comparing things side by side, right, to see if this is in or out, good or bad, that kind of thing. The distinctions are finding patterns. Is it that it only happens on Friday, that this stops and that doesn't work and these people don't show up? Or does it happen other days? So that would allow you to draw a distinction that this is a calendar-based issue, okay, or a work cycle-based issue, as opposed to an overheating issue with a machine, something along those lines.
Okay, all right. And one more question here. Are there any processes you can put in place to force you to look for external causes versus internal cause? What an interesting question.
I would suggest that's the role of the leader, and in two ways. One of them is you should be reading. You should be aware of the, through what we call business acumen. Okay. You need to be aware of the outside surroundings. So if a market's shifting, you need to find that out, and you need to be aware of that. The best possible source for this is to get the best advice from your team. If you're working with a team, everyone there knows something that you don't. Oh, well put. So they're only going to put it on the table if you invite it and you provide an environment where they can fully participate and they have a voice, but you'll be surprised by the amount of information and intelligence that you can get, that you can later test for validity from pulling it in from your full team or asking some of the experts in your organization. If you think it might be a marketing issue, or even if you're not sure, go to the marketing department and say, hey, is anything going on I need to know about? Are there any legislation coming down that is affecting us right now?
Yeah, so go ask counsel, whatever the business counsel is.
Yeah, or going to your suppliers and saying, are you supplying something better to someone else? Okay. Gaining all that data from inside and outside.
Okay, great. All right, everybody, I think we're just about out of time, so I wanted to, first of all, thank you very much, Tony. That was great.
It was a pleasure.
And thank you to all our attendees. You've been listening to Tony Welsh talk to us today about how did that happen, the 6 steps to figuring out what went wrong. This has been a Forrest & Company webinar, part of our growing list of resources available through Forest Fire. If you'd like to join up for Forest Fire Communications Group, please visit our website, www.forrestandco.com. That's FORRESTANDCO.com. Registration is free, and you can unsubscribe anytime, but it's my job to make sure you don't want to. With that, everybody, I wish you a good rest of day, and thank you for attending.